welcome to Cozy Constellation channel. Today we are having a cozy chat and we're going to talk about a very heavy subject, which is suffering. It is a very complex subject and we might have to split this up into several episodes, but here we go. Everybody in this world suffers. The animals suffer, the planet suffers. A question that I'm sure every single human being on the face of this planet has asked is, why am I suffering? Why does suffering exist? What is the point of suffering? I hear a lot of atheists say, well, if God exists and if God is good, if God is love, why does he allow suffering? Why does he allow terrible things to happen? Why does he let a little kid be brutally murdered? And then they come away with this idea that, well, if suffering exists, then God is not good or God isn't real. That's just a fallacy. So let's start in the beginning of when humanity began in the Garden of Eden. So God created everything. And 6,000 years ago, God created people, humans, on this planet. And when you read Genesis 1 and 2, it describes in very simple ways the creation of our planet and how God made all the plants and the animals and humans. In Genesis 3, it talks about the fall of humanity and how humans went from being perfect to being flawed and imperfect and even terrible eventually. So when you read in Genesis 3 verse 1, it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? This serpent, you might think, well, this is just a magic serpent that could speak, or it wasn't real. First of all, when people talk about the Bible, a lot of people want to discredit it, and they say, well, that's just symbolic, that wasn't even real. There are a lot of symbols in the Bible. There are a lot of things that are explained through symbols. But just because something was explained through symbols does not mean that thing is not real. Genesis is very literal. Everything about it is literal. So how can a serpent talk if serpents don't speak? In Luke 22 verse 3, it says, then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. What does that have to do with a serpent? The original Hebrew text, it says the serpent was a beast of the field. It says the serpent was more crafty than any of the other wild animals. These are literal animals. It was not the devil that looked like a serpent, because at one point I thought maybe it was the devil changing his shape to look like a serpent, but it wasn't. It was an actual real serpent. So if he was talking and he was lying, if the serpent was talking and lying and tempting the humans, there's only one creature in the world that does that, and that is Satan. So who is Satan? Let's go to Ezekiel 28. This is a prophecy against the king of Tyre. And there are a lot of prophecies in the Bible that are dual, in a sense where they are referring to two different people or two different things, even at two different times. But the situation is similar. When you first start reading Ezekiel 28, it's very obvious it's about a man, the king of Tyre, who was very evil. But as you continue reading that chapter, you see that it's not about a man anymore. So I'm going to read it for you. If you have a Bible, open it up. It's Ezekiel 28, starting with the verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In the pride of your heart you say, I am a god. I sit on the throne of a god in the heart of the seas. But you are a mere mortal and not a god, though you think you are as wise as a god. Are you wiser than Daniel? Is no secret hidden from you? By your wisdom and understanding you have gained wealth for yourself and amassed gold and silver in your treasuries. By your great skill in trading you have increased your wealth, and because of your wealth your heart has grown proud. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, because you think you are wise as a god, I am going to bring foreigners against you, the most ruthless of nations. They will draw their swords against your beauty and wisdom and pierce your shining splendor. They will bring you down to the pit, and you will die a violent death in the heart of the seas. Let me just pause right here, because in verse 6, it says, because you think you are wise as a god. Now let's go back to Genesis 3. Genesis 3 verse 5. This is the devil that entered the snake, possessed the snake, quite literally, and was speaking through the snake. In verse 5, the devil says, for God knows that when you eat from it, which is the fruit, it is not an apple, okay? We don't know what fruit it was. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And then verse 6, when the woman, who is Eve, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. So here we see the devil using this, oh, you will be as wise as God, as a temptation to make the humans eat the fruit that they were not supposed to eat. So there's a relation there. A lot of things in the Bible for us to understand, you can't understand by just reading one verse or one chapter or even one book. You have to read the entire Bible, because there will be clues scattered all throughout. And then in verse 9 of Ezekiel 28, will you then say, I am a God in the presence of those who kill you? You will be but a mortal, not a god, in the hands of those who slay you. And then in verse 12, Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. So let's stop right here. Remember how chapter 28 of Ezekiel is a prophecy against a very real, very human king of Tyre at the time? But how could he be in Eden, the garden of God? Who was in the garden of Eden? As far as we know, Adam and Eve. God would come in the evening to walk among the garden. I'm sure there were other angels there as well, but also the devil that had possessed the serpent there for a while. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. Carnelian, chrysolite, and emeralds, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl. Your settings or mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fire stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. So clearly, we're not talking about a regular human anymore, right? This is about Satan or the devil or Lucifer. In verse 17, it says, your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. In Luke 10:18, Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Let's go to Isaiah 14. This is a prophecy, again, that is a dual prophecy. On the very surface level, it is about the king of Babylon, who's also evil, but it is also about Lucifer. The devil or the Satan, they mean the same thing. His real name is not Lucifer. We just call him that. Lucifer itself is actually a very beautiful name. It means life bringer in Latin. And this term was translated from a verse of Isaiah. So we don't know his real name. In verse 12 of Isaiah 14, it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of dawn. This is where they got the name Lucifer. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Remember how in Ezekiel 28, it said, in the pride of your heart, you say, I am a God. I sit on the throne of a God, because you think you are wise as a God. So here we start to see how this angel, who was created perfect, as it says in Ezekiel, you were blameless until the day you were not anymore. From the day you were created until wickedness was found in you. So what does the name devil or Lucifer, what do these words mean? Devil is a word that comes from Latin, diabolos, which comes from Greek, diabolos, which means accuser, slanderer. Slander is to lie about someone. Satan comes from Hebrew, and it means adversary, one who plots against another. So we see that these two terms are given to an angel who was created perfect. He was an anointed cherub who was on the holy mountain of God. God doesn't live on the mountain. This is where the Greeks got their idea of Mount Olympus, that all the gods live there, because God lives in the highest place in heaven. He doesn't live in the clouds. God lives in heaven. And do we know where that is? No. God is spirit, and it's a spiritual dimension that we cannot see or we cannot go to. But a lot of times God would speak from a mountain. God spoke to Moses on a mountain because it is a very high place. You know, if you think of a mountain, if you think of a very elemental nature of a mountain, it's there forever, right? It's not like a sand dune that a wind can just blow away. A mountain will be there forever. And it's big and majestic and kind of scary if you think that you might climb a mountain and fall off and die. So mountains were sometimes used symbolically to refer to God's dwelling. When you go to Exodus and Leviticus, when God told Moses to build a tabernacle, and he had to build an ark, which was a box covered in gold inside and out, and on the top was a lid with two cherubs, which are two angels. Angels have hierarchies, and cherubim are the highest of the angels in hierarchy. On this lid were two gold cherubs with their wings touching. And in that space between their wings is where God's glory would manifest, while the Hebrews were in the desert of Sinai, going to the promised land. Those angels are angels of the covering. That is, let's say, the original job that Satan or the devil or Lucifer, let's call him, that was his original job. He was already the highest. He was an angel that was extremely beautiful and already had the highest position of all the angels. He and another one. And because he was so beautiful and he thought he was so wise, he started to feel proud, as we read in Ezekiel and Isaiah. And that is how he sinned. And it is a mystery. How could there be sin in the heart of a being that was created perfect? He was perfect until he wasn't. And that is because God gives all of his creatures free will. In Deuteronomy 30:19 and 20, God is speaking to the Hebrews before they go into the promised land, and he says, "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So you see that God was speaking to the people saying, I have set before you life and death. God was very literally giving them a choice. You want to live or you want to die? Sometimes I jokingly say, God didn't ask any one of us if we wanted to be created, right? God didn't ask me before I was born and say, hey, do you want to be born, right? What kind of choice did God give me? He didn't ask if I wanted to be created or not. And now that we do exist, he says, okay, do you want to live or die? Do you want to live or not live, right? Do you want to exist or not exist? Life or death? In Joshua 24:15, it says, this is Joshua now, after Moses has passed away, and he's speaking to the Hebrews. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, then choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. That's fine. If you don't want to serve God, choose who you want to serve. Whether the gods which your father served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living, who are all false gods, by the way. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So we have an option to choose to live or die, to worship the Lord or not. And I have heard a lot of people saying, people that don't believe in God and they want to mock the Bible and mock God, and they say, oh, well, how convenient for God, because he says that he gives you free will, but if you don't choose him, then he will kill you out of spite or revenge. And that's just a fallacy. That just goes to show that if you want to talk about God, you have to have some kind of knowledge to talk about God. If you want to say anything about God, you have to know about God. And how can you know about God? You read the Bible. If you don't know anything about mechanics, how can you criticize anything? I can't even say anything about mechanics. I don't know anything. So if you don't know anything about God, you can't just go around criticizing God, trying to find an apparent contradiction or fallacy that isn't there. It does not exist, because God is perfect. So that is not what the Bible is saying. And you cannot say, well, I want to live, but I don't want to be with God, because God is your life. God is the creator of everything, and God is the origin of life. You cannot have life without God. The same way, an electrical appliance cannot function if it doesn't have electricity. It's like if you have a refrigerator and you unplug it, it's not going to work. If you have a computer, the battery runs out, it's going to stop working, it's going to die. So there is no life outside God. And that doesn't mean that, oh, so I have no choice. So if I want to live, then I have to be with God. Well, God is love. God is perfect. God is pure. God never does anything bad. God never hurts anyone. God is love. It says that in the Bible. 1 John 4:8. God is love. So why wouldn't you want to be with God, who is love? We feel love for people and animals, but we are not love. We're human. God is love. How can we even comprehend that? If you think of the most perfect love that you can imagine, 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 4, it says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. So there we can get a very basic, simple idea of what God is. God is love. God doesn't want anybody to be lost. So let's go back to this angel that was made beautiful and perfect until he sinned, because he became so proud due to his beauty. And boy, do we see this happening in people all around us, right? If you open TikTok and Instagram, that's pride and vanity right there. So pride is the original sin. Okay, sex is not the original sin. The woman is not the original sin. The original sin was pride. And also interesting to note that in today's culture, there is a whole month, the month of June, dedicated to celebrating pride, the original sin. So you tell me if that is biblical or anti-biblical. Now, what is sin? Sin is breaking God's laws. We are born sinful, as it says in Psalm 51:5. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. We inherited this sinful nature as we are descendants of Adam. 1 John 3:4 says, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. And what is the law? God gave us 10 very easy ways to imagine what love is. He called it we call it the Ten Commandments. Jesus summarized them in love God above everything else and love your neighbor as yourself. But that doesn't mean that Jesus was saying that the Ten Commandments, all 10 of them, are gone. Much, that to the contrary, Jesus came and kept the Ten Commandments, and he said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So we all have sinned. What is sin? Sin is lawlessness, and the law of God is love, because God is love. So, look at the Ten Commandments. We're not supposed to lie. When we are lying, we hurt people. You're not supposed to murder. When you murder, you're definitely hurting people. Many people. You're not supposed to steal. If you steal, you're hurting people. You're not supposed to covet or envy belongings or the wife of someone else or the spouse, because when you do that, inevitably it will lead to hate. If you covet something so bad, you're going to inevitably hate the owner, and it might even go as far as murder or theft. Because if you want something so bad, you hate the person who has it, you're either going to steal it or you're going to kill him. I mean, just look at the crimes today. The other laws, respect and love your parents, because your parents are symbolically the Godhead. They are like God is our Father. So our parents reflect that. I know a lot of people have terrible parents, but you're still supposed to love your terrible parents. Even if you have a terrible relationship with them and sometimes you can't even be around them or be friends with them, you still have to love your parents. It's a law. They gave you life. God gives us life. And God even told us to rest on the Sabbath. And that might seem almost out of place, because you're like, well, how is resting love? Well, it's love for our bodies too, because in our minds, because we need to rest. And also because we are obeying God. And we're going to talk about that another day, because that's a whole nother subject. So the Bible says that we are all sinful, because all of us, every day we sin. If you don't murder someone with a knife or a gun, if you just hate them in your heart, it's the equivalent of killing them. Jesus gave that example. He said, if you look at a woman with lust, that is adultery. Because if you look at a woman with lust, or if you look at a man with lust, to the point where you're imagining yourself doing sexual things to that person, and that person is not your spouse, well, then that's a sin. Even if you didn't do anything physically, but the sin starts in your mind. The sin starts in your heart. So what does this have to do with suffering? Well, everything that is suffering is terrible. And suffering is a direct result of sin. In Romans 6:23 it says, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So what does this have to do with Satan, right? We talked about him. Let's go back. Let's swing back. So we are here on this planet that was created perfect, and Adam and Eve were also created perfect, just like the angel. Well, let's just call him Lucifer, even though that's not his real name, but let's just call him Lucifer. The same way Lucifer was created perfect until the day that he wasn't. Adam and Eve sinned because they disobeyed God. God gave them a test. And this test is how, when God gives us a choice, he's giving us a test. Do you want to live or do you want to die? And they failed that test. And they did die. Centuries later, but they still died. They were made to live forever. They didn't die right away. Today we can barely pass 120 years. We can barely pass a century. So why didn't God just destroy Satan right away? Well, let's go to Revelation 12. Verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Verse 12. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. Who's the devil? The dragon, previous verse. He's filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. So right there, in just a couple of verses, you see the dragon, the devil, and the serpent. And then in Revelation 20, verse 12, he sees the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is a devil or Satan, right there, right? They're all the same person. And bound him for 1,000 years. So the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is that ancient serpent? The serpent that was in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3. So all of these verses, they're not all in chronological order, but let's put them in chronological order. Sometime, we don't know when God created all the angels, Lucifer was among them, and he was perfect. But because of his beauty, he thought he was so wise, he became proud, and he wanted to be like God. And he wanted not just to be like God, but he wanted to be above God. He wanted to put his throne above God. He wanted to be God. And then war broke out in heaven, and he over here in Revelation is using symbols. But like I said, just because some things are expressed in symbols doesn't mean that that is not real, because a symbol just symbolizes something real. Over here in Revelation, he's referred to as a dragon or the serpent, and he drags a third of the stars out of heaven. And in Revelation, when it talks about stars, stars are angels. And in Revelation 12, verse 9, it says that great dragon was hurled down to the earth and his angels with him. So in his pride, he was able to corrupt a third of the angels, and they were all kicked out of heaven. In Revelation 12, verse 7, when it says there was war in heaven, the original Greek word is polemos, which is translated as war, and it could either be a very physical war, or it can be a war of ideology, like a controversy. So we don't know if it was exactly a real fight, physical fight. The angels were just actually physically fighting, but there was a definite war of ideology. What conclusions can we draw from this? That God is love, and all of his creatures obey the laws of God, and the law of God is love. So all the creatures were just good. When Satan was hurled down to the earth, Jesus even said he was hurled down. I saw him fall like a flash of lightning. And his angels, they were thrown to the earth. And when he tempted Adam and Eve, he said, oh, you will be like God. He tempts the whole world. In Revelation says he leads the whole world astray. So it seems kind of unfair maybe to say, well, why does God let us be tempted by the devil? Well, God tests us. We have free will to choose, and he gives us a test. He gives us a choice, so we can choose. But God will never give us a temptation that is bigger than we can handle, even though it might seem like it's bigger. It's not. And now I might be saying, well, you're talking about suffering, but you're talking about how evil started. Well, that's how suffering started. Suffering started with sin, because sin is the opposite of the law of God. If the law of God is love and pure and good, then evil is evil. Sin is evil. God is logical, and his law is logical, right? Don't steal. That's logical. If something doesn't belong to you, you don't take it. That's just pure, simple logic. Don't kill someone because you don't have the authority to decide who lives and dies. That's just pure logic. Respect God, love God more than anything, because God is our creator. He deserves the love. That's just logic. And tell me, what is the logic in suffering? What is the logic of us feeling pain and suffering? No logic. I love true crime. I watch a lot of true crime. You know, every time I see a video of something horrible that happens, in the comments, there are always multiple comments that said, why is this person so evil? Why did this happen? You know, what is the logic behind this person killing someone and chopping them to pieces and, you know, doing horrible, horrible things? Well, there is no logic. Think about it. And when the police have to arrest someone, you know, they need a motive. And sometimes the motive is just, well, I just felt like killing someone, so I killed him. If you really think about it, nobody has a real motive to commit any crime, right? Oh, they robbed the store. Why? Because they were selfish. That's the opposite of love. Oh, he killed someone. Why? Because he hated them? Just because he wanted to kill? Out of anger? Out of revenge? There's no logic to that. There's no logic to that. So if you think about it, and you don't have to think very hard, come to this conclusion, there is no logic to evil. No logic at all. And life is unfair because people can decide to be evil. And if you look at the world around today, and if you look at the world around us today, it seems like most people are just choosing evil because it's really growing worse. The people are getting worse. Every day I see a video on YouTube about some heinous crime and I think, oh my goodness, I have seen it all. I have seen it all. And then the next day I see something else that's even worse. And then the day after that I see something else that's even worse than that. And and evil just keeps spiraling forever and just getting worse and worse. People doing horrible things. So that's why life is unfair and there's suffering. And a lot of people think, well, what's the reason for suffering? Okay, there's no reason to. God did not create suffering. Okay, God can use suffering. God can make something good come out of suffering, but there is no reason to suffering. When something bad happens, I also see the kind of comments like, everything happens for a reason. No, it doesn't. What is the reason of a tornado destroying an entire city? What's the reason of that? Oh, everything happens for a reason. What is the reason for some pedophile grabbing a child and doing horrible things to the child? What is the reason for that? Oh, everything happens for a reason. Yeah, you having an accident and then ending up blind or maimed in some way, there's a reason to that? No, stop it. There's no reason to suffering because suffering is a direct result of sin, and sin goes against everything that God is. We can simplify it and say that sin is the opposite of God because God is love and fair and justice and mercy and empathy and compassion, and sin is everything against that. Everything that is bad, everything that hurts someone is evil. It's sin. It's breaking the law of love. So we're gonna stop right here. It's a lot to think about, but we will talk more about suffering in other chats. I hope you come back. I hope you like it. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next cozy chat. Bye.